Hey guys, I'm David Pitola, host of the David Pitola podcast and owner at SourceTrack Studio. Welcome to the studio tour. I've been a recording engineer for almost 10 years now and worked at Pixel Pro Audio for 6 years, just really getting my head into recording and immersing myself in it. And now I'm producing bands full-time in this studio. All right, so we came up to the second floor of my house. This is where the studio is. So up here, we have a nice loading area for bands to load in their gear, but I also keep some stuff out here, just some extra amps and whatnot to make the live room a little bit bigger. So I usually have bands use their own instruments, but if they want to use mine, just because they're really nice instruments, I've got them ready. So first up, this is probably the nicest guitar that I own. It works really well for recording. I love it. And of course, we've got the D-String Noiser 5000 on here. Got lots of these hanging around. To me, the Guild is the perfect combination between a Taylor and a Martin. I usually don't have people play this guitar, because this is my main instrument for my band, but it's my shark hook of a guitar, an LTD Aero 401 with EMG 81 and 85 combo. And this thing just shreds. It's really easy to sweep on. I don't know, it plays really well. I just had it set up recently. And I don't know, I just can't find anything better for what I play. And then over here, we've got the lounge. This is where bands can hang out. Got a nice couch from Kohl's here, and then 2 chairs from Target. And then some tables, obviously. Down here, I've got some good business books for bands, some music theory books and whatnot. I just wanted to keep it music focused and give bands some good reading while they're staying focused on their project. And then, of course, over here, we've got snacks and a mini fridge. And then what everyone's always talking about, the N64. This is easily the best part of the lounge. And I get more comments on this than any other piece of gear I've ever purchased. So got about 15 games here and people play this all the time. Obviously we've got some tables and stuff and some comfy chairs and a couch that bands can just hang out and play the N64 on. So that's the lounge. Let's go check out some more stuff. All right, this is the live room. Let's get some more light in here. All right, that's a lot better. So in here, this used to be this horrid pink color. I hated it. So my wife and I painted this nice forest green. We got some of these panels up here, these nice prime acoustic panels. They do a great job of just soaking up a bunch of the reflections. But I didn't want to cover the walls completely and make it so dead that the instruments sounded dull. So kind of shorter ceilings in here. I'd like to get some clouds eventually. But it works really well for drums. Let's talk about the kit here. So this kit is a Crush Chameleon Ash, and we've got the 22-inch kick, 10, 12, and 16-inch toms. They just are thunderous. The Ash is a nice mid-scoop sound, but it's really loud. It really punches through a dense mix. And then the snare, it's the Ash snare. I use this one a lot if I don't want to use any samples. It's as loud as a gunshot. It's a firecracker. And it just fits in every mix really well, no matter if it's metal, rock, pop, ska, it just works really well. For the cymbals, we've got some Peisty 2002s for the hi-hat, crash, 18-inch crash, 20-inch crash, and a 20-inch ride. That signature ride is probably my favorite cymbal I've ever heard. It was the most expensive thing on this kit, and it sounds incredible. Things I'd like to upgrade are, I'd like a different hi-hat, a little bit darker, and then maybe some smaller crash cymbals just to add a different palette of sounds. For the drummer, we've got these kind of drum phones. I don't know the brand, but they work really well. It's like 30 dB of reduction, so the drummer doesn't hear the kit, they hear themselves. Then for mics, we've got Audix i5 on the top and bottom snare, D2s on the rack toms, a D4 on the top of the floor tom and a D6 on the bottom of the floor tom, just to get that extra oomph, that extra girth, really make it sound like a bass drop. And then for the kick, I usually use this AKG D112. I used to use an Audix D6 quite a lot, and I did like it, but it really, I felt it backed me into a corner, and it didn't have the low mid punch that I wanted that this mic gives me. So if I'm going for a really scooped sound, I'll use a D6, but if I want a lot more of the mids, then I'll use the D112. And for drum overheads, I'm usually using these Aston Starlights. They've got a laser on them, and it's like the most expensive cat toy I've ever purchased, but they sound really smooth. I used to use Audio-Technica 4041s, and those sound really nice. They're really aggressive, but in this room, it's too small, and it was getting a really harsh build-up around 3 to 4K, and these kind of tamed that and got some tone shaping too. So once I use these, it's hard to live without them. Last but not least, for the drums, I've got this hand-hammered snare, of course by Crush. It fits really well with a lot of mixes. I typically have to use a sample with this one, but it blends really well with almost any sample I throw at it. And then we've got my guitar amp. I just retubed this. It sounds awesome. It's got 3 different channels. It's a Carvin V3. And then I got the Carvin 4x12 as well. I don't use this a lot for tracking. I usually have bands bring in their own stuff, but when I'm doing my own songs, I'll use this. All right, and now we've got my pedals. I'm not a huge pedal guy, but I've got my own setup for my metal rig. Just a power supply, cheap pedal board that I got as a gift, and then Tube Shrieker. It's basically a knockoff of the Tube Screamers. It's got the T8 and T9 circuits, so if I want a few different tonal options, one's got a little bit heavier mids. And I've got the Walrus Audio Deep 6 compressor. And this is going in reverse order, by the way. I love this thing though. It is absolutely fantastic. If I want the perfect amount of punch in my guitar, I have the attack right up the center, a little bit of sustain, and then I blend 50% or less for parallel compression, and then I just crank the level into the Tube Shrieker. And of course, a noise reducer because metal, and then a tuner. And also have a cloud lifter. This is not mine. This is my friend Chris's. So if you're listening, Chris, thanks for letting me borrow this for so long. I don't use this too often, but when I do, it's usually for a ribbon mic, just to boost the level. It's got this impedance control too, so if I want to change how open it sounds, if I want it a little bit darker, I just turn up the impedance. If I want it a little bit more open and bright, turn down the impedance. All right, then we've got some guitars in here. All right, this is my first bass. It's a PV Fury 4 active pickups. It actually sounds really good, but yeah, I use this occasionally. All right, and then we've got my classical guitar. Now, this is the one I used in college, and it's a Cordoba C7 with a cedar top. It just sounds absolutely beautiful. I don't think I'd ever want a different classical guitar. All right, now up next, we've got my storage closet. Of course, something for the bands to look at while they're playing. Now, this is a little bit messy in here. It's still a work in progress, but I've got some extra drum heads, cases for my drum mics. In here, I'll just set this down. Here we've got the Audio-Technica 4041s. Like I said, I don't use these a whole lot for drum overheads anymore, but occasionally I'll use them for acoustic guitar because it gets the picking sound really nicely. I've got another Audix D6 if I want to use it for the kick drum. A pedal that I haven't touched in years, but I've got it in case I want it. It's just a TL2 distortion from Digitech. I've got a PreSonus PRM1. I was using this back when I had different monitors so I could tune the speakers to the room, but that gave me some weird phasing issues, so I don't really use this much anymore, but I've got it. Now, this is not mine. I'm using it to record my band. This is my drummer's mic, so thanks, Ben, for letting me use it. This is a Lauten Oceanus. Now, this mic is rather huge. We're using this for vocals. We did use it for kick out. It worked okay, but it's definitely more of a vocal mic. Then we've got some drum honey, basically moon gels, some extra drumsticks because you can never have too many. I've got a headphone distribution amp, just a cheap onstage one. I use this when I track bands live, so they each have their own headphone send, and they can control their own volume too. And I've got some extra headphones up here, 3 sets of the Audio-Technica M20X, just for tracking live. A couple different drum beaters. Now, I didn't realize how much of a massive difference a different drum beater can make, but if you're doing any kind of metal or where you want a ton of kick attack, use something like this with that nice silicone beater. And then if you want something a little softer, more of a boomy kick sound, that felt tip works really well. And then just some extra tubes and some extra strings, tons of cables, and then everything else is needing to be cleaned up. All right, let's see where the magic happens. This is the control room. My beautiful desk, built by my friend Ben. Took a long time, but it could not be more perfect. I'm super happy with it. So first, let's talk about the PM1000. This is my tracking console. I don't mix on this. I only use this for preamps and EQ, mostly because when I took the transformers from the buses here and put them as direct outs on the channels, I took the wrong transformer and I can't use these buses anymore. So let's talk about what I did for modifications. First thing I did was I recapped the entire console in all of the preamp sections and EQ sections. I changed the EQ points and added more headroom to the preamp and just gave it new life. I mean, these are old, they're from the 70s, so it needed new parts to just work a little better. So these are very much like a Neve style preamp now. They've got big old gain stage, and the EQs are really smooth. I wasn't using them for a long time until recently, then I realized how good they are compared to software EQ. So then I added transformers. I used the built-in transformers on the last 8 channels because they're really colorful. And then on the first 8 channels, I used Jensen transformers because they're really clean. I just wanted a good toolbox. And I took those transformers and sent them to DB25 connectors. So on the back, I have outputs with DB25, just 2 connections, and snakes running from there right into the patch bay. During that time of modifying the console, I was getting really frustrated because DB25s are not easy to work with, especially for a novice like me. And I almost gave up a few times, but I'm glad I didn't because I really love this console. It sounds amazing, and I wouldn't trade it for many other things. So I love the console, but sometimes that's just not the sound I'm looking for. So I've got some other preamp options here. Got this nice 2-channel tube demeter, super warm preamps, very forgiving on a harsh acoustic track. On kick and snare even, it sounds really cool. I just retubed this so I can use it again finally after not using it for about a year, but it sounds great on pretty much everything. Then I've got this Hairball Audio Lola preamp, very hi-fi sounding. I use it a lot on bass and vocals if I just want this nice sheen. Especially bass, it just makes it cut through a dense mix easily. I've got this Chameleon Labs 560 EQ. I don't use it. I shouldn't have gotten it. I should have another Lola so I can have a pair, but that's how gear goes. And then I've got these 2 Cappy preamps. It's the VP26. I went with the more colorful option, kind of like the 70s API sound. And they're very thick in the low mids and sounds great on overheads especially. Just started doing that. I won't do it any other way now. But it sounds really good on vocals too if I use something like a dynamic mic. It adds some good punch to it. So all of these are connected to the patch bay up here, and then it goes into the converter, which is an Apogee 8016X. And then I've got the soft limit on. I don't really need it, but it sounds really good. And then from the patch bay, I can also access my other gear before I go into the converter. So I've got my favorite, the Distressor. I cannot live without that thing. I use it almost every session. Use it for snare, vocals, sometimes bass, but I tend to go with an 1176 for bass. I don't know, I can't live without it. I use it on all kinds of aux percussion, acoustic guitar. Literally the most versatile compressor I've ever used. We can go down the rack, then I'll get to that. Like I said, I've got an 1176. This is the warm audio version, but I had it modified by Revive Audio, and it just sounds so much bigger. It doesn't cut off the bass. The original version has a nice shine to it, but it was really grabby on the bass, and this just leaves it so much more open and professional sounding. The guys at Revive really know what they're doing, so if you're looking for gear modded, check them out. I've also got an AFX compeller I thought I was going to use for mastering, but I have not touched it. I used it probably once, maybe twice, and I just have better options with the distressor in the 76 that this doesn't really find a use. Maybe I'll use it for the podcast at some point in time, but I don't know. Then we've got this Crown amp, also not mine. My friend Lucas is lending it to me because he doesn't need it right now. So this is powering the NS10s, but eventually I'd like to get something like a Bryston or maybe that new CLA 200 from Avantone. But it works for now and it sounds good. And then the Apogee, that's my converter. I use ADAT out and I take the ADAT cables into my Audient ID44. This thing, it's really great. I've got 2 sets of monitors coming out of it, 2 ADAT ins, 2 headphone sends, and I've got 4 more preamps on here if I want to use them. I've got so many other preamps that I don't really use these that often, except if I'm on like a Zoom call with someone and I've got to just plug in the 7B and throw it in there. But they're good. I just like stuff with transformers a lot better, so I don't really use it for that, but the DI is nice on this. But my favorite thing with this is all the monitoring options. You can do dim, cut, whatever this ID button is, you can program it to move the knob however you want. But then what I usually use is this F3 to switch to the NS10s, or F1 to make it mono. Often I'll mix in mono on the NS10s, and then if bands are here, they listen to the Eve speakers because those are a lot more fun. They have more bass, and bands like to hear themselves a little bit more boomy. As you can see right now, I've got this red cable plugged into one of the headphone sends. This is actually going into the live room, so the drummer has a direct feed of the playback of Pro Tools, low latency obviously, and I can just adjust their volume here. Another thing on top of the desk here that I just cannot live without is my fader port. Now I write a lot of automation. To me and to a lot of people, automation is the difference between a pro mix and an amateur mix. If everything sounds the same throughout the whole song, it gets kind of boring. And I go through every single track and just move this fader up and down so you can hear everything well and the song breathes and moves. And if I didn't have this, I'd have to do it all by hand. This saves me so much time and headaches. Highly recommend getting one. This is the older version. I'd get the new one if you can, because a lot of these have, some bad motors happening, and those are kind of a pain to replace. But whichever one you get, cannot recommend it enough. All right, so I'm sure you saw these drawers over here too. In this one, I keep extra hard drives, a ramp box that I used once, but it's good to have just in case I need it. And then some M40Xs. I use these for tracking in here. And then my drummer, who also is lending me the Oceanus, is lending me a pair of these Austrian audio headphones. These are the High X55s, the closed back version. They've got a few different versions out right now. I don't know how those sound, but if they're anything like these, they can't be bad. They're incredible. I've never heard a more realistic sounding headphone, and I need to get a pair for myself because I don't think I can live without them at this point. Then I've got a tape measure for recording drums. I know it sounds weird, but I always measure the overhead mics equidistant to the center of the snare. Little pro tip for you guys, keeps your snare in phase. And then I've got an aux cable, so if someone wants to show me a demo on their phone, I can plug it right into the DI on the Audient. Some adjustment stuff for the kick pedal, and a drum key, of course. And that's it for that drawer. This is the much more fun drawer. We've got rack screws, that's a lot of fun, right? But then stereo DI box. When I first got this, I didn't think I'd ever use it in stereo, but this thing has been incredible. So I use this for keyboards a lot. because a lot of keyboards have stereo output, and I just plug them right into here. And what's great about these cappies is that they're stepped gain, so I can have a true stereo signal without any weird gain or phase issues. But I also use this for guitars and bass when I track a band live. Guitar plugs into one, bass plugs into the other, or I've even recorded a band where both guitar players played at the same time. I don't like to use amp sims, but I use this when we're tracking guitars so I can get a dry signal and edit the guitars. If it's heavily distorted, it's just a brick on the amp track. The DI track, you can see all the transients and edit if you need to. So this has been amazing. I've also got a single channel DI. I don't use this one anymore, but I've got it just in case. And then we've got some mics in here. Got an Aston Origin. It's a very clean mic. I don't use this a whole lot anymore, just because I find it kind of boring. It's a little too clean for me, but I use it on guitars once in a while if I want to bring out that 2K-ish. It works really well for that. If you haven't noticed, I like Aston mics. I've got the Stealth. The reason I got this mic was literally just for the guitar setting. It was the most perfect mid-range I've ever heard, and it's exactly what I want to hear when I record guitars. I actually started using it for my podcast as well, so it's a really versatile mic. I've got this CAD ribbon mic. I know what you're thinking. CAD mics are not super great, whatever. This thing is awesome. This ribbon mic is so amazing. I use it all the time. For drum room, for guitar amp, for acoustic sometimes. It's just awesome. I love it, and I want to get another one so I can have a pair. Then we've got this mic parts mic. This thing is amazing. So this comes in like a $400 kit, and I built it in 45 minutes to an hour-ish. And I compared it to that Lauten Audio Oceanus. It was very close, really, really close. For 400 bucks, I mean, it doesn't look like anything special, but it sounds really incredible. So you use this for vocals a lot. The Sennheiser E609. Often I'll use this in combination with another mic on guitar amps. Sometimes the ribbon, sometimes the Aston Origin. But this is like the main guitar sound. And then I'll use the ribbon or the Aston as a supplementary mic. And then I think there's one more thing in here. Oh yes. If my hand starts getting carpal tunnel from drum editing, I've got this little brace. Haven't had to use it in a while, thank God, but I can start editing like this without, without hurting myself. Then over here, we've got my friend's broken mic that I've got to take a look at. I just don't have a small enough screwdriver to open it up yet, but I'll get there, I promise. Then I've got patch cables. They stay neatly here. So if I need them for the patch bay, I just grab them and go. And then, like I said, I recapped that Yamaha console. Well, it ended up being a lot cheaper to buy in bulk than in single pieces. So I have a bunch of extra capacitors that a lot of them don't actually fit in there because I bought the wrong ones. So I spent extra $200 on capacitors that are sitting around here waiting to be used. But I've got them if I need them. And then Deoxit. Seriously, get this stuff if you don't have it. I use it to clean dirty knobs on stuff. And I actually use the green one a lot. They've got this red one that leaves like a film, and the green one is really good for spraying guitar jacks or pedals or whatever. I don't have it in here because I was working on my car with it, so it's useful in many situations. Over here, we've got one of my favorite vocal mics, the Shure SM7B. Now, I've got the pop filter and the windscreen. If I'm doing screaming tracks for metal bands, I keep the screen on there. But if I'm doing clean vocals, I'll take the windscreen off to get more high end out of it and use the pop filter to just cut the plosives. Another pro tip for you. And then what's great about this section over here is I've got my 500 rack right there, and I've got all the plugs for all the gear over there, right over here. And if I want to run cables from the overheads into these, I just have long enough cables to go from the live room over to here and then plug them in and get them into the computer. And of course, we've got my speakers. Now, when I got married, we got some money from the wedding, obviously, and my wife was so awesome. She knew I wanted these speakers and she told me to get them, and I've been using them ever since. I really love these speakers. They're a little boomy for this room, but they're working really well, and bands love them. They just sound really flat. And then, of course, the NS10s. I got these a few years ago, and again, I cannot live without them. I know them so well, and it's so easy to mix on them. I had them sitting on the desk for a while, but I just got these on-stage monitor pads at Pixel Pro Audio, and it's really cleaned up the low end a lot. So if you've got NS10s or any kind of speaker, really look at getting some kind of some monitor pads or something just to isolate it from the desk. So I use Pro Tools, and when I'm tracking, I always have to clock the audient to the apogee. Now, the apogee is clocked to a Big Ben, which is a legendary word clock, and I have no problems using it once the audient is clocked to it. If I don't clock it to the audient, I get this weird jitter and clicks and pops. So if you're using an external converter, just make sure you're clocking to one of the sources so that they're synced up together. And last but not least, I just recently got this Akai MPK mini keyboard from a friend. I didn't realize how much I needed to use MIDI when I'm working with solo artists, and this has been pretty incredible for that. Instead of having to write out MIDI parts, just play them. I don't know, if you're thinking about getting a MIDI keyboard, just get a small one like this. You won't regret it. I use Pro Tools, and yes, this is a Windows computer. Pro Tools works great on Windows. I've had it crash very few times. Now, if it has crashed, it's typically been my fault because my computer hasn't updated in quite some time, so I need to get on that. But it's nice to have a solid Windows system with Pro Tools working really well. Occasionally I'll use Studio One if I'm mastering a project, but lately I just don't want to master because it's really nice to have somebody else's ear on it as the final finish. And then a mastering engineer also has tens of thousands of dollars in just stereo gear for mastering, whereas my money is all put on the front end for tracking. So for plugins, I'm using stuff like the Waves SSL channel, SSL comp. Some stock plugins I use are the gates. That's one of my favorites, the Pro Tools gate. The SansAmp PSA1, I cannot live without. That is my bass tone right there. And then the Slate plugins I've got, I really love their Distressor, the console, virtual mix bus, and some of the EQs are really nice too. Oh, and another one I cannot live without is Heat in Pro Tools. For drums, it just livens them up, and I'll occasionally use it on bass and vocals as well, but typically it's just the drums that really need it. By far my favorite plugin is Cranesong Phoenix 2. It's the best tape saturation I've ever heard. It's the most expensive plugin I own. I own much cheaper hardware than that plugin, but it was the best decision I ever made as far as plugin purchasing. I really can't live without it now. It just fattens up a mix and livens it and makes it sound like it should. And right here, I've got the world's cheapest talkback mic. Another reason I can't live without this console is because I've got talkback feature right here, and I've got the cable going around the desk, and then out of the back of the console, there's a talkback output. That is also going to the same box that the headphone output is, so I can talk directly to whoever is in the session. And so next up, we've got my bass. This is an LTD B205. It is a solid chunk of wood. This thing is so heavy, but of course I've got the D String Noiser 5000, otherwise known as an old sock. Clean, of course. And it's got passive pickups with an active EQ. I don't really use the EQ too much. I just prefer getting new strings that sound good and then going from there. But I use this in my band Noetic, and I keep it out here because I practice while I'm bouncing songs. And then we've got these bass traps. As you can see, I've got more prime acoustic stuff here, the checkerboard on the back wall. But then these bass traps, what's great about these is I can move them. So I can keep them in here when I'm mixing, but if I want to track drums and get a little bit drier sound, I put these in the live room in the corners, and it just soaks up extra hi-hat stuff, extra boominess from the kick. And I've got a pair of them, so it's really easy to move them around, and it sounds great wherever I put them. Next up, we've got, I know they don't look like much, but we've got these little stools people can sit on, but I also use them for cable storage. So in this one, I've got extra guitar cables, and there's a 20-foot and two 25-foot ones in there. I use the 25-foot ones when I'm live tracking, because if bands are in the live room together, they've got to get in here somehow, and 25 feet is more than enough for them to have some room too. The couch, obviously, it's pretty bad when I got it. It was new and it was just stiff, but now I've had band members fall asleep on this while we're tracking drums, so it must be pretty comfortable. And then in this one, I think I took everything out of here just because it was messy, but oh yeah, that one's empty. But same concept, same exact stool, and sometimes I'll store stuff in here. And then last but not least, we got decorations. The band I work with, Unbroken, I'll get some light on there for you. Those are a couple CDs I did with them. They've got another one coming for me because they have a record coming out soon. Sounds awesome, by the way. And then we've got the first patent for a ribbon mic. Just a cool thing I put on there, and I actually kind of want to get a guitar hook there instead, because my V doesn't like to sit on a stand, but it works for right now and it looks cool. So this has been the studio tour of SourceTrack Studio. If you want to find me, check out the link below. It's sourcetrackstudio.com. And if you want to listen to a music business podcast, another link is going to be below. It's called the David Pidela Podcast. You don't have to spell it, just click the link below and take a listen. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video. As you can see here, there's a curtain, and it's gonna stay that way, and it's just butter in this room. No. Sure. We can talk about it, yeah. I made this when I was like 12. No!